here we are again. It's you and me, and we will attempt to repeat the great success story that was the Lake Como genomes talk. So here we are in the Costa del Sol, different country, but similarly nice weather.
Salty water.
Salty water, yes. Cliffs, water, Mediterranean food. And just like last time, we will mainly be talking about genomics today. And I've tried to scribble down a list of interesting topics that we will be covering. So why don't you tell me about the first item on the...
So the ancient genomes have, since last time, we made a lot of progress. And we actually managed to publish a paper in the peer-reviewed journal with about 2,500 ancient genomes from Western Eurasia. So like Europe plus Western Asia. So like Turkey, some from the Middle East, Iraq. We actually, the good news is that we managed to confirm what we were discussing in the previous, in the Lake Como. So the general trend for IQ and education was positive. So there was a positive temporal trend. So the polygenic scores for education, IQ, increased during this the last 10,000 years, and this effect was persisted after accounting for geographical variables such as latitude, longitude, and also ancestry components. So
like the PCA component.
It was similar, like that mixture.
Okay, so it makes
yeah. So this approach was actually, I don't know if someone has done that before, but I think it's pretty powerful because I didn't just look at the correlation between the polygenic score and the years before present. So the date when the estimated date of the ancient bones, but I also controlled for geographical and ancestry variables using a multiple regression. And so this way we managed to estimate the effects of latitude. So the climatic latitude is a proxy for a climate. So northern latitudes are colder. So on average have colder climates, so we can see the effect of climate on the different polygenic scores.
Mm-hmm.
And the main effect of climate was that on the height. So the height polygenic score was affected by climate, and this was pretty cool to find because this is actually in line with what we know from statistics on height. So or even like anthropological theories such as Bergman rule, whereby bigger bodies are more advantageous in colder climates because they have a lower surface to volume ratio.
Polar bears are big.
Yeah, so they disperse less heat, whereas in warmer climates you have smaller bodies are more advantageous, and there were also like there are studies showing that climate affects height. So, but we managed to show that this was actually genetically mediated, not due to like differences in diet. Although like a big outlier here was like Africans. So, but this is we talk about later about during in the modern genomes.
Mm-hmm.
And another trait that was correlated with latitude was autism. So, like in ancient genomes, they were slightly more autistic, the polygenic scores in more northern latitude.
The stereotype accuracy again, the gregarious Mediterranean with the autistic introvert Scandinavian.
Yeah, exactly.
So then this was the first study, the one based on the glorious David Reich data sets that they very generously compiled from all these preprints and published studies of genomes, and then granted they put it in a really obnoxious format, but you can still download it and then just convert it back to whatever it is. But some usually have to impute it anyway, so you kind of need to get the BAM files, blah blah, the whole glimpse routine. But nevertheless, you can get started with the SNP data or the kind of pre-made data set.
Yes.
But then you followed up with the East Asian genomes, ancient ones.
So there is a not so famous group of researchers in China that are doing the same thing that the Wright lab is doing in the US, and they're using the Beijing Genomics Institute. It's like a Chinese biobank. It's called NGDSGC, and they published all the BAM files from the papers that that come out from these studies on this website, and most of them are open access. So I managed to collect about 1,000 ancient genomes, not just from China, but China, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Mongolia, and then so I had a fairly large sample that enabled me to replicate the study done on Europeans. The results were mostly similar. So there was an increase in the autism polygenic score, like in Europeans with in modern times. I didn't find the schizophrenia polygenic scores. There was a big drop in Europe, but not in Asia, which is I don't know. It could be due to like the lack of portability of this polygenic score, or also because it doesn't explain that match variance, not like EA or high. And the EA and IQ polygenic scores were also increasing in East Asia, and the height one was not really increasing. So in Europe there was selection for height, but apparently not in East Asia. In East Asia, actually, there is even a drop in more recent times, which actually fits with the stereotype of East Asians being shorter than Europeans.
So I remember you did a plot. I don't think it was in the paper, but maybe you compared the ancient West Eurasians to the ancient East Asians with the mean score for height over time, the mean polygenic score for height. And as I recall, in some of the older data, it appears that Asians were taller than Europeans.
Yeah.
And then their selection kind of leveled off, or it might have slightly declined, or something, negative selection.
Yes.
Whereas in Europeans, they just kept selecting upwards for taller the better, sort of. So this might mean that, I'm not sure, but like Mongolians, they were quite fearsome warriors and stuff, and they might have been not so much shorter than the Europeans, or maybe even taller.
Yeah, and this is like also there is some it's not scientific evidence, but there is some anecdotal evidence from like historical figures like Confucius or other that were told for times, and also this pot army where like this army that they found in China.
In the cave, the clay statues.
The clay statues, their height was like 5'10" or like 5'11".
Okay, so like very close to modern Scandinavians.
Yeah, if they were like, we don't know if they were like real size corresponded to the size of the people, or they were like bigger.
It's probably a little giant selection.
Yeah.
In medieval Europe, there was this various mercenaries and so on you could hire, right? And there was the so-called two-hander, the Zweihänder. It's like often German or Dutch maybe, but mostly German mercenaries. Yes. You have to be like a very big, strong guy, and you wouldn't get a shield. You would get like a two-handed giant sword, which is a very risky role because if someone attacks you, you've got to parry with a 30-kilo blade. Very good luck with that one. Any arrow will kill you. But on the other hand, you can sort of break certain formations because you can just kind of punch through shields with this, or at least knock people over. But there was also double pay, as I recall. And I think pretty sure I read that these had explicit like height requirements to join this kind of mercenary group. So we don't know necessarily, or at least I don't know about these, what kind of soldier these ancient Chinese statues were supposed to resemble. But if we make some suggestion that they were probably higher than the actual average Chinese person at the time. So that makes some sense. So one thing that's interesting about the ancient genomes with the data we have, it's mainly limited to the two relatively high IQ regions of the world, the Europeans and the East Asians. And so globally, when we look at genomic variation in humans, we find that also with the phenotypes, right? We see that the more northerly populations are smarter. But as I recall in ancient data, this doesn't seem to be the case, at least not within these regions.
It is actually the case in East Asia. So in Europe, we didn't find this. This was mainly because the Anatolian farmers were very smart for their time. So the Anatolian farmer component is associated with higher IQ and higher education polygenic scores.
Compared to the hunter-gatherers.
Compared to the hunter-gatherers that live further north. So it's confounded by the cultural context. So there is a theory that farming is a strong selective pressure for higher cognitive abilities. So when the Anatolian mixed with the hunter-gatherers, they increased the average intelligence of the population. And I didn't publish this, but we have like preliminary data with the Yamnaya. So the Yamnaya people were a bit mixed with the Anatolian farmers, but they were mostly hunter-gatherers, and they were much smarter than the other hunter-gatherers. But the Yamnaya were like pastoralists. So it seems like switching from a hunter-gatherer to pastoralism or farming has a positive effect on cognition. So like at the time when in the North Pontic steppe around 6,000 years ago, when the Yamnaya formed, they were like pastoralists and farmers living close to each other, and they were and then hunter-gatherers, Eastern European hunter-gatherers and Western European hunter-gatherers. And both the Western European hunter-gatherers and the Eastern European hunter-gatherers had much lower polygenic scores for education and IQ compared to the pastoralists and the farmers.
So we could also think of certain modern populations. Now, most of the world have switched to farming, but there are a few hunter-gatherers left. And if we zoom in on some of these and looking at their neighbors, we know we have in Africa the sand bushmen and the various these Paleo-Africans who are, as far as I know, all hunter-gatherers still. And if you compare those to their neighbors, mostly Bantus, as I recall, the Bantus tend to enslave them, and we do have a very small amount of cognitive data on these Paleo-Africans, and they do score lower. So we don't know necessarily if that's due to nutrition, this sort of thing, but we could make a guess that there's probably some genetic pattern to this. We know that at mixed modern Africans, and this was also a study by David Reich, one of the first at mixture studies, if maybe the first one. And so because the Bantus kind of spread all over the place in Africa, Bantu expansion, they mixed with these hunter-gatherer Africans, the pygmies, and so on when they found them. So in modern pygmies populations, often the ancestry is something like 30-50% Bantu. And this, of course, means there's some variation in ancestry. And since Bantus are also much taller, it makes sense to use this as a test case. So David Reich and his team back in 2010 or something like this, maybe even earlier, they got a sample of pygmies. I think it was only like 50 or 100 people. And they used a mixture to estimate the Bantu component and the pygmy component, and then measure their heights. And you can indeed see that there's a very obvious slope for height in these populations.
Despite the height, it seems like height is a highly polygenic trait, but it seems like the pygmy have got some mutation that actually decreases the height. So it's
Yes.
so the difference is not only due to the polygenic score, but also due to like a specific allele that
Like the
yeah,
private alleles.
yeah, private.
Because the other special thing about the Paleo Africans, which is kind of in the name, but they were the first population to split off what we otherwise call anatomically modern humans,
Yes.
or Homo sapiens sapiens, and so they had the longest time to get any private mutations that no one else has, and have any kind of special selection of these, whereas the rest of humanity was a much larger population size, and
Yes.
then split into who knows how many populations, and out of Africa and all this.
Yeah.
So it's not so unthinkable that they have some large private alleles. Yes. And we know from modern whole genome studies that if you look hard for rare variants with sequencing data, you can sometimes find like a variant that by itself is like gives you -5 centimeters or
Yes.
something, by like having a severe disruption of the growth hormone or something like this, maybe early stop of puberty, who knows. So there is also the hunter-gatherers in Latin America. There's a few left in the like these what is it called, the fierce people, the Amazonas ones.
Yes.
And I'm not aware if we have any even crude IQ data on these, but I think it would probably be fair assumption to say that the surrounding populations who are farmers instead of hunter-gatherers are probably smarter. Mm-hmm. I know if you read anthropological research, the surrounding people like scam them. Yes. Because their language is it's one of the ones where they can't count. Mm-hmm. And so you show up with like 7 pieces of something, and to them it's just 1 too many, and so they don't know if they're getting 6 or 7 of something. So you can kind of cheat them, and apparently the locals do that. I forgot they're called, but it's the Yanomamo, yeah?
Yanomamo, yes.
The fierce people.
Yes. And also in Papua New Guinea, in the mountains, there are like still hunter-gatherer tribes that have little contact with the outside population, the coastal population. Yes.
So let's hope we somehow get some more genomes from these. And of course, the king of such isolate groups must be the Southern Andaman Islanders.
Yeah.
Who are famous for shooting bow and arrow at anyone.
That's going to be hard, much hard.
I would think you show up in body armor that can stop any arrow, or just fly there with a drone. We see all drone warfare now. So simply, we've seen drone warfare, but what about drone genomics? Fly in with a drone, look for some kind of remnant, possibly their poo, steal that, and then fly away. Might take a while to get enough sample size, but it will definitely work. But
another, so I didn't, I forgot to mention about the IQ, the correlation with the latitude. So I say that in Europe, we didn't find it because of the Anatolian farmers. But in East Asia, there was such a correlation. So in the ancient, at least in the ancient genomes, so the ancient genomes from East Asia, from northern latitude, so northern China, had like higher polygenic scores for IQ in education, but there was also like a curvilinear relationship. So the Arctic people had lower polygenic score, which is actually what we can see today. And this is probably due. So like there is a trade-off between latitude and climate and cognitive abilities, because even if colder climate have a selection pressure on cognitive abilities, when it becomes too cold, they cannot develop complex societies.
Right. Not without modern technology.
Yeah. So in the ancient, or farming, even farming.
Farming is impossible in Greenland, at least for now.
Yeah.
But I think the Norse, when they settled the Vikings or the Norse, they settled Greenland in, I think, around 1100 or so. And they were able to farm up there for, I think, about 200 years until they mysteriously vanished.
Yeah.
And Danish researchers, they collected data from 10% of the Greenlandic population, which sounds like a lot, but it's about 5,000 people.
Yes.
And this was like 10, even 15 years ago, they got this data. And then, because they tried to resolve one interesting question, is that what happened with these Norse settlers up there? Did they just kind of leave at some point? We know where their buildings are and they're destroyed or abandoned, but we can see they were there, and we can do the radiocarbon dating to see roughly when they left, and or at least when we don't see any more signs of them. And so one question was like, did they ever breed with the locals? Because the current Greenlanders, which is the second wave of Arctic peoples to come to Greenland, they were present, as I recall, at the same time. Shortly, they came shortly after, or they were a bit more north than they were up in Thule, right? So, so it's possible that they went south and somehow intermated with the Norse. And so, if so, and if these offspring survive, then you should see old Scandinavian genomic data in modern Greenlanders.
Yes.
Especially on this area. I think it's the west coast. But they couldn't find any evidence of this, despite having a very large number. They did find a lot of evidence of modern admixture, but in ancient genomes, if it's old admixture, the chunks of ancestry from different populations will be smaller because they keep getting broken up by recombination, right? So, if essentially in this case you're looking at a mixed distribution, as I recall, the chunk size follows a Poisson or something like distribution. And so all the mixture will result in a very flat tail where some very small, lots of very small pieces, but very spread out in people. No one has a large piece because it will all be.
Yes.
Whereas the very recent will give you kind of a very concentrated distribution. So you have both of these distributions, you will kind of get a very concentrated one plus a tail that's too far to be compatible with the only modern mixing. But they found no evidence of this despite having 10% of the population. So maybe it cannot be conclusively ruled out. Maybe some people inbred with them, but they went back to Denmark or Norway or Iceland. Or maybe they just all died out in some bad winter or something.
Like they did in North America when the Vikings settled in the northeast coast.
Newfoundland. Or Wineland, we call it.
It seems like they went extinct, basically.
They also mysteriously vanished after some time.
Yeah. And so another strong fact we found in the East Asian dataset was for skin pigmentation. So there was I used 2 polygenic scores for East Asia. One built specifically for East Asians, so it's from AG was done on East Asians, and one
the EA Asian one.
Yeah, for skin color.
Oh, for skin color, okay, build only.
Yeah, and then one for from the UK Biobank, Trans Ancestry Pan UK Biobank. So it's like a Trans Ancestry GWAS, and they both converge towards the same outcome. So the one from the UK Biobank is the polygenic scores for higher, darker skin, and the other one was for lighter. But they had like basically opposite directions. So in East Asia, the one for lighter skin went up with time, and the one for darker skin went down with time. And this is also probably due to changes in diet. So maybe when people switched to farming, they couldn't get as much vitamin D from in their diet, so they had to get lighter skin, or it could be other reasons. I don't know. But we also see like a curvilinear relationship with the latitude. So because the Arctic people are not as are a bit darker than the northern Chinese, for example.
The interaction between what should we call this mode of living, farming, hunter-gathering, pastoralists, is I think very interesting from a human history perspective and with genomes. So when we look at the ancient genomes in Europe, we see essentially the hunter-gatherers were replaced with the farmers, and the 3 different research teams who looked at this, they all confirmed that the farmers were smarter, even though the hunter-gatherers were more northern. So clearly, in this perspective, climate selection is not the only thing. It seems that the mode of living, so to say, is also quite important. But we also know from worldwide studies of populations that never went away from hunter-gathering that there are climate relations in these. So it definitely works even up north. The Inuits in typical modern studies are about 92 or so IQ.
Yeah.
And there's also these various very cold Siberian living people. I think they're called Yakuts.
Yeah.
Some of these.
Yeah.
And in some old anthropological research, you can find studies of people who went and lived with these different hunter-gatherers as they were, 100 or 150 years ago. And these anthropologists who did this, they studied the total collection of tools used by these populations. And if you calculate a tool complexity or diversity factor from this anthropological information, you can see more advanced technology in the more northerly hunter-gatherer populations. So we know with reasonable confidence that this pattern still works.
Yes. So
it appears that essentially whoever adopts farming gets a kind of boost because it selects a bit stronger for latitude or for intelligence than pure hunter-gathering does. And but it could also be more indirect effects because the farmers were much higher population density because growing things off the land is much more effective way than just kind of waiting for animals or fruit to appear in front of you or somewhere. So the population density at the time of Europe when the farmers came in, it was very low, which is also one of the reasons that if you look at modern data, like modern Europeans have very little hunter-gatherer ancestry. I think it's about 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
And you could think of this as the hunter-gatherers getting like genocided. But the more realistic thing is that there probably was some fighting. It's just that if you only have, like, say, 5,000 people in all of Denmark and like tons of farmers come in, you will be heavily diluted even if no one kills each other.
Yes.
So I'm looking very much forward to the future of ancient genomes. But right now we have the west and the east covered. We will probably see more cultures. Very recently they found some old graves in Saudi Arabia or so. And it's very difficult to get genomic data from them because the climate there is very hostile to preserving bones. But maybe with better technology, this can be done.
We also have a recent study from Morocco of ancient genomes. So it seems like the next frontier is North Africa and the Middle East. Africa, the ancient genomes from Africa are still very few. There are not many.
Yes, also except South Africa.
Yeah, also the Americas, we don't have many. There are new studies, but there are not that many.
But if we were to move on to modern populations, so we've seen in the ancient data that there seems to be height selection, but then in some populations it stopped. And in the Yamnaya versus hunter-gatherer versus farmer, we see that the Yamnaya were taller. Is that right?
Yes. So the Yamnaya were taller than the contemporaneous populations, especially the farmers. So the farmers were like the shortest group. So this also this is what I got from studying about 400 ancient genomes from the steppe region north of the Black Sea. And the farmer ancestry was the big 0.5 in a regression after accounting for the other ancestry components, latitude and longitude and date, and had a big, strong negative effect on height, whereas the state pastoralist component had a positive, not as high, but a positive effect. It is actually tells us a lot about the causes of this gap, because the standard view in anthropology is that the farmers were shorter because they were not getting enough protein from their diet, because they were just eating grains. But apparently it is not true. So apparently it could have contributed, the diet, but it's not the whole story. They also had like genetically they had lower height. I don't know what could be the reason for this, like what kind of selection, white farmers. It's probably because they came from further south So we know that there is this selection of colder climates on height, and the state pastoralists that came from further north, from they came from the east. They were a mix of Eastern European hunter-gatherers, and so like Eastern Europe, especially like Northern Eastern Europe, is very cold. So Russia, Ukraine, and also the Caucasus hunter-gatherers, which is in the mountains. So they both came from very cold places, and they maybe also it's like there's more selection due to their diet. It could be that because they were their diet was more rich in meal and dairy products, this enabled them to grow taller. So they didn't having like genes that make you grow taller wouldn't deprive them of the nutrients for development. So it could also be both climate mediated, also from the diet, the different diet. So maybe the farmers had to become shorter because they didn't get enough protein from their diet.
That's right. But there was another case of this kind of thing. There's ancient genomes. Well, they're not exactly ancient, but they're medieval genomes from the Norse, like Scandinavians during the Viking Age.
Yes.
And as I recall, their heights were also above average at the time.
Yes.
So I think in historical textbooks in general, that this is the way this is presented, at least the Danish ones, is that there was like a local heat wave or some temporary kind of pre-modern global warming.
Yeah.
And that was particularly strong in Scandinavia, and therefore improved farming, and which made the men taller and also caused the population surge, which then leads to too many young men who then went out on adventure. Yes. I think that was roughly the conventional view when I read some history book. But we now see that there's, as I recall, there's also a genetic advantage at the time. So it can be that that is like there's like interplay with the available food, right? So if you have more food in some time, then it's better if you have these polygenic scores for more height, which gives you more hunger. But if there's more food, then you're not starving, and this then gives you some advantages of being taller, which enables you to do go Viking as raid and pillage.
Yeah.
So here it also works. So I'm kind of curious if we find some genomes from I don't know if the Mongols were particularly tall, but they were very successful. Interesting also was the other findings with the Yamnaya compared to the farmers at the time, right? There was the autism one too, no?
Yes. So this is still not published, but yes, the Yamnaya, the ancestry component of the state pastoralism, which is a good proxy for Yamnaya, was positively correlated with the autism polygenic score, whereas the farmer had like a negative, like a slightly negative effect. So.
And then just all this talk about height leads us to our other recent study about the current height distribution in the world. And on modern humans, there's very good data on height and also how it improved, because you just essentially get every census and all military data and so on for every population on Earth. And there are fortunately some academics have already done this work, the national cohort of development or something. And so using this data, you can tell us about the study.
Yeah, so we used the polygenic scores for two different samples, partially overlapping, one of 50 populations that had like a whole genome sequencing data, and the other one was whole genome sequences plus some imputed array data. And what we try to predict the average height, measured height of this population using the polygenic scores with the regression models. So in the regression models, we used different environmental variables such as protein, amount of protein in the diet, calories, the HDI, Human Development Index, and we also controlled for spatial autocorrelation, and we found that in the models, both the environmental variables and the polygenic scores had an effect on average height. But the polygenic scores had a bit larger effect on the average height modern population.
So a particularly illustrative example is the case of Africans. So if you look at the global human distribution of height, you'll see that essentially taller countries are also richer in general.
Yeah.
And if you look at within a country over time, you'll find the same pattern that as cities or so get richer, they also grow in heights. And this correlation is consistent enough that many economic historians use heights of populations as a proxy for development or wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But if you sometimes look at the this kind of view would give you maybe the idea that that maybe all humans are genetically equally tall. Some are just different in richness. But when you take a closer view, you will find that is not the case, right? So if you look at East Asians, they have also increased in height, especially the Koreans and this, since the Korean War and so on. But they're still not as tall as typical Western Europeans or even Southern Europeans. And so it is not because the East Asians are not rich enough. They're in fact, I think, roughly the same as Portugal or something like this.
Especially Japan. Japan is rich as Western Europe. But
yeah, but they're not as tall. A different way would be to look at Asians that have migrated to live in Western lands. And so we know lots of data from, say, the USA that East Asians who are in USA, they're taller than the ones who grew up in poverty alone, but they're not as tall as the European Americans. Yes. And so clearly there must be some kind of genetic explanation here. And the environmental one you can see, especially with Africans. If you look at the current height for Nigeria or so, which is roughly the place where the slaves in the Americas came from. The Africans here, they're like 172 or so centimeters, something like this. Whereas the ones in the US are a bit they're a bit higher, a bit taller. And so, granted, the ones in America have some European admixture, which on the genetic model would make them a bit taller, but not all the way up. So there's like maybe something like 5 centimeter height difference between African Americans and current Nigerians in these kind of populations. So that suggests an environmental component aside from the small effect of a mixture.
Yeah.
So what we did in the regression model, right, was to combine these multiple different ways of computing the height polygenic scores. There was, I think, the trans-ethnic general, and you could explain the other.
So there was the trans-ethnic, the bigger GWAS of height, and then there was also the one based on within family GWAS, which is a better estimate of direct effects, not confounded by the environment, by the shared environment, but it's also based on a smaller sample. So, but we found the same effect using the within family GWAS. So the results were consistent across different GWAS. And so we also solved this paradox. It was called the African paradox by Angus Deaton, because when he analyzed the distribution of heights across developing countries, he found that HDI had actually a negative effect on the height in the developing countries, and he explained this. He came up with some theory for why the Africans were taller than what you expect from their HDI. And his model was that Africans. So there is a high death rate among poor people in Africa, and so the poorer people would die. So that's why you would find you would find higher, taller stature in Africa. But when actually you use the polygenic scores, you see that the effects actually due to the polygenic scores.
Right. So it's nice to see that even in economics, some apparent paradoxes can be even explained by contemporary genomics, which is nice. And the height example is particularly, I think, illustrative of how gene and environments can need sometimes to go together in a model to explain things, because otherwise you cannot explain the East Asian pattern or the African change from.
Yeah. So what Deaton did was he analyzed data from a bunch of developing countries, and he saw that, for example, South Americans were shorter than Africans, despite Africans having a lower human development index.
Yes.
So he called this the African paradox because he couldn't explain it, and he also discounted the genetic explanation. He just dismissed them.
Yes. The Jared Diamond method.
Yeah. So there was it was like, how is it possible that? But when I actually carried out the regression and I used the polygenic scores together with the HDI, this counter paradoxical negative effect of HDI on average height disappeared, and actually was positive, as you would predict.
As you would expect.
Yeah, so this apparent paradox was actually due to his failure to take into account very important components.
Yes.
And this guy got the Nobel Prize in economics, but apparently cannot, be bothered with the
most obvious cause of height variation in the world, genetics. Which kind of reminds me as when they made the PISA studies of the OECD PISA, it gives some, I think, roughly 16-year-olds some kind of math test, reading test, so on. This was sort of it's not meant as an intelligence test. It's meant as a kind of how much a student's learning test, with the explicit goal of trying to figure out how well the various schooling systems do.
Yeah, it's a test of it's framed as a test of the quality of teaching.
That's right. Purely a function of how great your teachers are, and that doesn't seem to be necessarily what the data show. It's somewhat of a non-starter, because we know from even going back to the Coleman report in the U.S. in the 60s, back when they were implementing these Great Society civil rights stuff. They did this huge study, U.S. And if you try to take like measured characteristics of schools and you try to predict how well the kids do on standardized test of teaching or whatever it is you're learning in school, they find that like if you account for like parental effects, like so something you measure in the parents, even if you don't necessarily claim or even believe this is genetic, but if you somehow proxy the parental intelligence or any other aspect that contributes, then you'll see that the school at most can predict about 10% of the parents. And so, but even that isn't somewhat of an overestimate, since your controls are not perfect. In very cool modern behavioral genetics study is the so-called same versus different classroom study. And so in these, you look at twins, whether monozygotic or dizygotic twins, and when they are old enough to reach school age, parents have a choice. Do they go to the same school or not? And it's kind of unclear why does some parents choose one or the other. There seems to be a lot of variation in what kind of advice they get. I think twin births are something like 1 out of 100, or maybe a bit less. And so in many cases, it seems kind of random whether they go to the same school or not. And even when they go to the same school, they're not necessarily in the same class, right? Yes. Usually there's like 1A and 1B or whatever it is, at least in Denmark. And so by checking whether these the twins who are in the same class at the same school, or not in the same class, but at the same school, or in completely different schools, essentially you have a measure of any school and any classroom effect, right? Whether they get these or not. And so using tens of thousands of twins across Western countries, they try to see if you can prove that twins in the same classroom or the same school are more similar than the ones who are not.
Mm.
And they basically found nothing.
Mm.
Like they were not any more similar on any kind of scholastic ability score. They were not any more similar even on like desire to learn and all these kind of non-cognitive skills that you would actually expect a good teacher to could boost or something.
Yeah.
But if the good teacher could boost the stuff, then the same classroom and so on should be more similar. And yet the data, even with 10,000 twins, cannot bear this out. So I don't know what hope there is for trying to use PISA to look at teaching effects or whatever. It seems a bit of a hopeless idea, but maybe you can look at some big reforms and hope some like regression discontinuity magic could happen. We've already covered, I think, history and genomics, but there are some other histories. So personally, I know there's one that's requested a lot, which is the ancient Greeks, Galton's hypothesis. You're familiar with this one, yeah?
Yeah, I am. We don't have a lot of data on ancient Greeks. We have like a bit more on ancient Romans, but it's divided between different periods. So for each period, we also don't have a lot. So we have like preliminary estimates. And for ancient Greeks, I covered them in the Western Eurasian ancient genomes paper, and it seems like their education score was high, but was not the highest. But their IQ polygenic score was among the top. So we have like some preliminary evidence that there could be something to it.
So we need to tell our Greeks in the audience, please go out and dig up the bones of your dead forefathers so we can figure out if Francis Galton correctly estimated the IQs of the ancient Greeks and why it is that Greece was the birth of European civilization. Finally, we have kind of where you see the future of genomics going. I could also go into this. Where do you see the genomics the next 5 years?
Especially, you mean like the ancient
genomes, but in general also.
In general, yeah. So I think that the ancient genomes in the next 5 years will cover more like non-European or East Asian populations. So like North Africans, Middle Eastern people, like Sub-Saharan Africans and Native Americans. And maybe also like South Asians, because actually we don't have many South Asian ancient genomes actually.
So just because they get eaten, it's very humid there, and so I would expect it's very high density of species, and this sort of thing. So it would be difficult to see how it would end up getting preserved unless it was like deliberately buried in some way or another.
And I think regarding the modern genomes, I think we have the same. So one of the biggest problems of GWAS is that they're done only on European. But now they are starting to, so they have started doing them on East Asians, and now there are some efforts to carry them out on Africans, because Africans have like the largest amount of genetic variation. So it would be useful to actually, and they also have like the biggest problem of portability of the European polygenic scores. So it will be useful to have also GWAS on Africans. And I think this is what the direction of the next 5 years.
In fact, Africans have another thing that is both beneficial and a disadvantage, is that the LD, the correlations between different SNPs on the genome that are close to each other, say if they're both on like chromosome 15, somewhere in the middle, or the correlation between SNP A and SNP B there will be quite high. If you have a T on one then you're say very likely to get a G on the other one. And this means that when you do a GWAS, often you just kind of find a region that the entire region just highlights. Clearly, there's some kind of height or IQ related genetic variation here, but it's unclear which of these SNPs it is because they're all highly correlated. But in Africans, they're more weakly correlated, so it'll be easier to find the causal one. And if it's causal, then it will also port between populations.
Yes.
You can say the disadvantage is that you kind of need more people because now that things are not so correlated, you cannot just kind of use one SNP as a proxy for a bunch of other ones that are close by. This proxying will not work so well, which is also why LD decay is so bad from into Africans from any other population. So from the perspective of like kind of futuristic use of genomics, like genomic editing, embryos, this sort of thing, you need to know the causal variants. Otherwise, if you edit some variant that doesn't do anything itself, but it just happens to be close to the other one, editing that will do nothing. Yeah. So if optimistically, maybe of the current GWAS is maybe 10% of the variants we find are causal, everything else is a proxy. So if you made 100 edits, you're getting 10 edits, not very efficient. So GWAS is some Africans. It's that meme. Wokes and hereditarians are in agreement. Of course, we need more GWAS on Africans. What are we waiting for?
More diversity.
We do, in fact, need more diversity in genomics, both in opinion and also in the data sets. I think also related to our history chats, we had the Roman Empire findings where it seems that at the time of Rome's height, it was also higher in human capital and genetics. But there were many other historical civilizations that kind of had a rise and fall, such as the various Iranian, Persian kingdoms. I think the Minoan Greeks before the regular ancient Greeks, the Athenian Greeks, or whatever they're called. Where there's various Amerindian civilizations, the Mayans, the Aztecs, so I would be very curious to see if the trajectory and the height and fall. I think that the Mayan was the one that collapsed before Europeans came along.
Yes.
So that one would be very interested to see if this follows the same kind of pattern as we found with ancient Rome. And China and Japan, I'm not sure if there were some clips, but we definitely know there are some. And so I think in Latin America, there are a lot of skulls from the human sacrificing stuff. So maybe they were sacrificing humans so that later, some hundreds or years later, we could do ancient genomes on them and see who got sacrificed. GWAS for getting sacrificed. Yeah. That's perhaps the most based GWAS.
They got sacrificed for the good of science.
Yeah, it's well. And on this kind of macabre end, I will have to ask if you have anything else you would like to add about genomics or any other science.
No, I think we covered everything. Yeah. So.
Very good. In that case, we will look at the camera and say, adios, amigos.
Adios.
Cut.